the most important takeaway for you in your situation is you got to follow your boss's lead. So I had a previous video, and it was made because in my Twitch stream, I had a Norwegian speaker express that he had difficulty pronouncing the STR sounds. Now this is interesting because Scandinavian English speakers, their English is pretty good. I think they have the least amount of difficulty in pronouncing anything. They are nearly, I mean, they are fluent, but they're not going to have any kind of real difficulty. But what happened was this individual, I don't know if this is indicative of all Norwegian or Scandinavian speakers, but when they pronounce the STR sound, so in the word strong, they add an extra H in front of the T. So not strong, but they say strong. And the key takeaway is whenever you want to do proper pronunciation, you hear the correct pronunciation, you can't just slam your head against the correct pronunciation and force it. You really have to break it down, go through it slowly, and then work your way through the rhythm to do it fast. The common mistake people make is when they hear pronunciation from a native speaker, they think, oh wow, they just say it so fast, I have to be fast too. But when you're not used to that speed, if you just try to do it as fast as they do, it's going to sound awkward. You have to really acclimate, you have to get used to it, and smooth over speed is better. So the smoother you do it, even if you talk, I'm going to force myself to talk a little bit slower here. There's no stutters. There is still a rhythm to it. There is kind of a flow when you speak. So even if you hear somebody talk super fast, they're saying, hey, what's going on? What have you been up to lately? Hey, what's going on? What have you been up to lately? Hey, what's going on? What have you been up to lately? There is a certain cadence, a certain flow. And if you think about breaking it apart and riding those waves, you're going to get a lot better. But to this user's point, I don't want to shout out their username because they're talking about work, and I want to be able to protect them a little bit on that point. But this user, I see you, they say that my boss is Canadian, and he was correcting my pronunciation all the time, forcing me to say strong while I'm used to saying strong, as you were teaching in the video. I'm very confused now. When you are getting advice from a native speaker, and in this case, I don't really know if they are actually a native speaker. We know that they are Canadian, but immigrant to Canada, an immigrant to Canada, or born in Canada, raised in Canada, like a full-fledged Canadian speaker with Canadian American English. What level of a native speaker are we talking about? Okay. The second part is native speakers don't always know what they're talking about when they're trying to give advice. So is this a native speaker who has a teaching background? Again, I'm not trying to say that you have to be a teacher to be able to pass on advice. What I want to point out is even people who are English instructors, they're going to have a certain type of tunnel vision. What I really want to talk about is this a person who has ever tried to learn another language before? I think that's going to give you the biggest benefit. Part of me, when I'm empathizing and relating to non-native English speakers, I know where you've been because I've struggled, I've screwed up when I've tried to learn Japanese is like the main thing. Whenever I see a Japanese speaker trying to learn English, I know kind of what they're going through because I've been on the other end of it to a much more limited extent. Same thing goes for Chinese and Korean and Vietnamese. Normally, when I'm talking about the issue with a native speaker trying to give you advice, I'm usually talking about grammar because grammar is so fickle. I did a video recently talking about how English grammar is hell. There's so many contradictions. When people give advice what sounds right, they usually can't back it up. And even if there is a rule, even if there is an explanation, there's usually an exception. So it's gonna get really confusing in that sense. And it's usually not to your benefit to try to remember a rule because you're only gonna get even more frustrated later running into a situation where it doesn't apply at all. So what I really want to encourage and focus in on when you're talking about being confused here is you're going to feel what you feel, but I want to tell you don't feel confused. What you should really think this through as is this is a great observation. you're having awareness here. You notice that there is a difference between the sound strong and strong. The tricky thing about pronunciation is, again, going back to that notion of speed, people will pick up on the speed, but they actually can't hear the difference between the two sounds. So a very common example of that is Japanese speakers, or Japanese learners of English. Japanese people who are trying to learn English, they really struggle with the L and R sounds, right? I know that's a stereotype, but there is some truth to that. And because I've tried to learn Japanese, I know that the difficulty with that is because the L sound, as English speakers know it, it doesn't even exist in the Japanese language. In fact, whenever they bring English words over to Japanese, they just turn everything into an R. So everything just exists as an R, and now you have to expose, like you have to acknowledge that sometimes there's an L, sometimes there's an R. That's one confusion point already right there. Probably for you, it's no issue at all. And obviously no issue for me. Light. So we have the light and taking a right. Light and right. Light and right. L and R. There are people who can't hear that. So if you can't even hear that and pick it up, how are you going to adapt it to yourself? So a little detour there, but I just want to point that out, that it's great that you have that awareness. Like, that's a huge first step right there. Pronunciation is tricky because some people don't have the awareness. You don't always have the most accurate resource that's critiquing you. You know, I think it can be very exhausting in your situation. You said that your boss is correcting your pronunciation all the time. Now, is this necessary? Is this needed? I don't know what type of work environment you're in and what you're trying to do. If you're a language instructor, you know, that's going to have a lot of difference versus if you're in a non-customer facing role. Like, I don't know why your boss would be critiquing your pronunciation that much. The most important takeaway for you in your situation is you got to follow your boss's lead. Doesn't matter if I think I'm right. I do want to note that as far as Canadian pronunciation goes, I think the main differences that most people would say off the top of their head would be the way that Canadians pronounce about and sorry. So about becomes kind of like this about, and then sorry becomes sorry. Sorry. I've never heard the difference with strong and strong, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I haven't talked to that many Canadian people. But again, why should you follow your boss's lead in this case? Because your boss is in charge of your salary. Who am I? Like, even though I want everyone to have confidence in speaking, to be able to speak more smoothly, to be able to better make sense of all this English complication, to break away from the academic bubble that a lot of people are limited to. I don't want to affect and impact how much income you make. So to keep your boss happy, you got to follow your boss's lead. And this doesn't only apply to speaking, right? There's going to be anomalies in the workforce where you might have a better idea. You think this is more effective, and you probably are right. But what type of headache are you wanting to endure? How much change can you actually have? Like, how likely is it going to play out where you say, boss, I don't know why you're saying it this way. I went online, I found this other person, he told me how to pronounce this word. I think he's right. There is no good that can come out of that situation. So that goes beyond English pronunciation, right? This is like business communication. So please don't shove this in your boss's face. I wish you all the best in managing work-life balance, navigating pronunciation and communication in the workplace, and then just on your own accord, how you want to practice and learn pronunciation and note these differences. You can still keep a catalog. You can still bring notes. If you want to keep asking pronunciation questions to me on a completely separate plane, we can do that, okay? But don't make things harder for yourself at the workplace.